Hi everyone, this is Vince Gellman. Now is the time to practice critical thinking, to question what we are being told, to question what we're hearing through the mainstream media and other sources. And yet I would say the majority of people are not questioning enough. They are not practicing critical thinking. Now, why is that? So let me take you on a little bit of a journey to explore different reasons for why that is. So let me start with a question. How many of you were asked as children questions like, what do you think? What do you feel? What's true to you? What matters to you? Let alone questions like, what do you want? And what do you need? Or what do you dream of? How often were you asked questions like that, or other questions that were supportive, meaningful, allowed for self-reflection, versus being told what to think by your teachers, your parents, your grandparents, your minister? For most people in my experience, it's less than 10% of the time that they were asked questions, let alone questions with this quality, open-ended questions that really allowed for self-reflection and critical thinking. Now, if we grow up being told what to think as the norm, we're soon going to lose our capacity for critical thinking. Add the fact that we are then put in a school system that praises you on what you know versus supporting you to not know, supporting you to wonder, and then that further cements this neurobiology that struggles with critical thinking, struggles with juggling answers. And so that is one reason why we are struggling to critically think. But there's another reason, and that is if we go more deeply into the context of trauma. Most people that I know did not get their needs met as children. They experience a lot of failures in love, at home, at school, elsewhere. These failures include neglect, abandonment, physical abuse, sexual abuse, spanking, which is physical abuse, and other experiences that really had a big impact on their physiology and wired them for what's called a survival physiology. So what happens is that the more trauma there is, the more the cortex region of the brain, which is responsible for critical thinking and is responsible for self-regulation or self-soothing, the more trauma there is, the more the subcortical regions of the amygdala and the brainstem hijack the brain. They take over. And so there's more of a reactionary fear response that is wired in that makes it harder for the cortex to do its job, to self-regulate and critically think. Now, let's go a bit south, down below the neck, into the heart, into the gut, the enteric brain. What happens is that as children, we learn that it's not safe to feel. When we are traumatized, it's scary to feel. So we leave the feeling body, which is not just emotion. I'm talking about felt sense, felt knowing that exists in the heart and the gut. We leave that to travel north into the mind, the thinking mind. And I don't mean the critically thinking mind, I mean the reactionary mind. Now, we need our mind when we're scared to become more vigilant, to become more calculating. We need to know the quote-unquote right way to think, otherwise we may get punished. Or we need to know the right way to behave, otherwise we'll get punished. So we become more vigilant. Vigilance or hypervigilance is a chronic, it's a hallmark of a traumatized physiology. We need to know. We need to figure out the right way to be, the right way to think, the right way to act. And so we become more calculating and less trusting of our fluid felt sense. So now we have less access to the cortex, we have less access to the feeling body that says something isn't quite right. You know, if you are a woman and you're walking down the street on the sidewalk and you suddenly get a feeling something isn't quite right, you may go across to the other side of the street. You may cross over to the other sidewalk, which is actually what police officers teach people to do in certain trainings, is to go to the other side. You know something isn't quite right. Mothers feel this with their children. Something isn't quite right. They just know without knowing how they know. That's a felt sense of attunement. That's there most naturally when we're born, but we lose this for reasons I've said. So now we can't read between the lines, so to speak. We can't feel into the subtlety of what's actually being told to us, right? This is about subtle perception, not literal, linear perception. A traumatized physiology becomes a rigid physiology. This is far removed from the fluid state that children so beautifully demonstrate, which they do through cartwheels and spirals and expressing their emotions in wild eruptions. But it becomes, the trauma physiology becomes rigid. When it becomes rigid, it takes things more literally, and that's very important for you to know. A rigid physiology takes things more literally. It struggles with subtle perception. Now, let's add one more element, and that is, and I spoke about this in a previous YouTube video, we have patterns of submission encoded in us, in our DNA, because we had to submit to survive. We had to submit to survive the abuse. We had to submit, otherwise things would get worse. These are coded patterns that go beyond this lifetime. And I don't want to go too much into them because you can simply look at the previous YouTube video that I believe is called Awakening Your Sovereign DNA and Breaking the Spell of Submission. So when you add the patterns of submission in your DNA, when you add that fact, and you add the fact that we struggle to critically think, and we struggle to feel, we struggle to have subtle perceptions for all these reasons, and more that I haven't mentioned, then we are going to be more prone to taking what we hear as truth versus questioning. We're going to struggle to critically think. And so, we need to heal, my friends. We need to heal. We need to heal these patterns and reclaim our body. We need to reclaim our body such that we become like we were as children, where we trusted our instincts and we said, why? Because if we don't, there's big consequences. There's big consequences when we simply say yes and we do not hear the voice in our heart, in our gut that says, wait a second, that says no. And remember, how safe was it for you to say no as a child? How safe was it for you to question as a child? So, I leave this with you to ponder. And if you need support healing, I do healing with Starlight, in person and remotely, and I'll put a link in the description. It's also in my bio if you're looking at this on YouTube or on Instagram. So thank you so much for listening, for watching, and I hope I gave something to you today that will support your awakening and your health and empowerment. All the best. Thank you.